Other contributors include United States Postal Service, dedicated to putting reliability at the core of USPS Ground Advantage to help businesses operate smoothly. More at usps.com/ground advantage.
This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. On the local news roundup, in a surprise move, the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization joins Charlotte City Council in withdrawing support for I-77 toll lanes. Mecklenburg County Manager Mike Bryant receives high praise for a budget that makes no cuts in service while holding the line on taxes.
This guy made an elephant dance.
But that budget doesn't include reopening Jail North, something Mecklenburg Sheriff Gary McFadden says he needs to do.
There's a crisis. There's an emergency.
The General Assembly moves closer to putting constitutional amendments on November's ballot that would limit income taxes and property tax hikes. Mooresville's mayor considers the prospect of resigning, and North Carolina Senator Tom Tillis continues to find his voice, now taking a stand against Donald Trump's plan to take $1.8 billion in taxpayer money and give it to those who attacked the Capitol on January 6th.
I think it's stupid on stilts.
Here to fill us in on those stories and more is WFAE politics reporter Steve Harrison. Mary Ramsey is local government accountability reporter for the Charlotte Observer. Ryan Pitkin is co-founder and editor of Queen City Nerve. And Erik Spanberg is here. He is the managing editor of the Charlotte Business Journal. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here.
Morning.
Great cuts this morning. Great cuts.
Yes, thank you very much. Yesterday afternoon, a shocking announcement. Kyle Busch, I think he's the winningest driver in NASCAR history, two-time Cup Series champion, 41 years old. He died suddenly yesterday. Erik, what else do we know about that?
We don't really know much at all about this, Mike, other than what you just said. He had won a Truck Series race 6 days before he died. He had been feeling poorly for the past 2 weeks, though he was racing. He went to the hospital earlier this week, and then came the horrible, stunning news that he had died at age 41. And in addition to all those accolades that you just mentioned, Mike, I think it hits all the harder because NASCAR is essentially here. All the teams are based here. And this is the weekend of NASCAR's longest race, which is the Coca-Cola 600 at Charlotte Motor Speedway. So a time when you have, for lack of a better term, a home race for the entire industry. And to have something like this happen just hits hard.
Yes, particularly on race week. He had already said he wouldn't be able to race because he had been sick and hospitalized. He survived, of course, by his wife, Samantha, and his children, Brexton and Lennox, and our condolences to them. Well, we got right up to the toll booth and found that we didn't have any quarters. Last week, Charlotte City Council withdrew support for NCDOT's proposal for toll lanes on I-77 from uptown to the state line. And this week, the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization also said no. Steve, how big a surprise was that?
I think it's a massive surprise. Both the city council vote 9 days ago or 10 days ago and what happened on Wednesday night, I think it's a really big deal for two reasons. One, it's kind of a 50 or 100-year decision on this highway, that our future generations would be living with. And then it's also really interesting just because of what happened. This doesn't happen in Charlotte. The Charlotte way is that the toll lanes move forward. The business community works with the city and the elected officials and the local leaders to push this through. Everyone's on board. There's some opposition, but the opposition is overcome. And in this case, that didn't happen. And I've been here 20 years. I can't remember a time like that. So I was stunned.
Before I go to Erik, there's an article in the Observer this morning about what this means. It's the end of the Vi Lyles era, in which we have a non-conservative mayor, but she was somebody who is very careful about our business relationships with the city. And now that seems to be fading away. And as you point out, we're not doing it the Charlotte way. This is a new way. We're saying no to things. What kind of reverberations will this have for the business community, Erik?
I think that I know that one of the things that's been talked about the past couple of days is how the business community gets more involved in local elections. They don't like the way that this has gone. They don't like seeing the Charlotte way disappear, if you will. And so I think that is being discussed very aggressively and ambitiously right now, at the same time as they are trying to figure out whether this thing can possibly be salvaged in some way, which would take a couple of Hail Mary touchdown passes and then some. And going back to Steve's point, I mean, you think about the past 2 weeks. Let's remember that the city council motion was made after that 10-1 vote for a resolution to have more studies and to work more closely with NCDOT. Typically, that would put a bow on it for Charlotte, as Steve said, and then you would go on, you would do the studies, whatever. Eventually, you're going to have the deal that you essentially expected to have. But instead, Renee Johnson pops up with this surprise move. It's not vetoed by Vi Lyles, who has been a friend to the business community. And then we get into this week. Remember, it wasn't even on the agenda Wednesday night. And the meeting began with the chair of the CRTPO saying, look, this is not something we want to rush through. This is an irreversible decision. Let's just slow down. I want to put it on the agenda for June, and then we'll vote in July. And typically, Steve, as you say, that would have been the way things rolled. That is not the way it went Wednesday night.
Because Matthews Mayor John Higdon pushed the vote. He pushed for this vote, even though it wasn't on the agenda. He said that he was worried that Charlotte City Council might change its mind yet again and wanted to put the kibosh on that before it could happen.
If somebody, one of those people in Charlotte, and I'm not questioning their veracity or their compassion, but if one person changes tomorrow, we can't vote, or we can vote, but it will not be rescinded ever.
And that's because Charlotte has 40% weighting of the votes on the CRPTO. But Steve, were there other unspoken factors at play here with this move by John Higdon from Matthews?
I think so. I think, there were a lot of people who were opposed to the toll lanes. They had a super majority of this weighted vote. Okay, so, and John Higdon has been a consistent opponent. He voted against this plan in the fall of 2024. So Mayor Higdon has been consistent. But what I think is interesting when you watch that meeting, how dogged he was to push this forward that night. He was relentless in, we need to vote tonight. We need to stop this. And I think some of this goes back to how he feels he was treated, in his opinion, his view, very shabbily in the lead up to the transportation sales tax that we approved last fall. Remember, the new plan cut his town out of the light rail. He pleaded for help. He pleaded for city leaders to kind of sit down with him and work to try and find some kind of way to bring the train closer to Matthews. And they really brushed him off. I mean, they felt like, look, Matthews is a small player. We don't need their votes. And I don't think Mayor Higdon forgot that. I mean, I think that he carried a lot of that resentment into that meeting on Wednesday. And, they took away his train and he took their highway away, took their toll lanes.
Wow. Is this all, Ryan, is this all due to public reaction? Because the public reaction was not favorable, particularly on the west side, where neighborhoods would have been impacted by whatever they do to that highway. It's going to happen on the west side. And does this effectively end this for our lifetimes?
I think the first answer to your first question, I think, is the biggest factor. There's all sorts of nuance and little politics behind the scenes, like Steve was just saying about the CARTPO vote, that people have discussed. But with a mayoral race coming up, and everybody, we've discussed this in past episodes with the range of people who have their eyes on that seat, then it was a much more, a chance for them to actually have to listen to the community and listen to their constituents and really act so that something wasn't hanging over their head during campaign time. There's also the fact that houses were being raised, and people are much more sensitive to that. People have said there was community outrage about the north toll lane, so why didn't this happen then? But I think the fact that you have people in historically Black neighborhoods who are going to lose their homes played a much bigger role in the fact that community output was taken more seriously this time, as opposed to just people who didn't want to see a construction site over all this time or over the next however many years. But yeah, I mean, as far as where this leaves us, NCDOT has not hidden their disgust with this decision. Basically, it doesn't seem like they want to plan to implement any tools to continue on despite the vote. they're just like, we're going to pull this $600 million project and we're going to go use it elsewhere. We're going to take our ball. We're going to go back to Raleigh and we're going to go see where we can bring it. And I don't imagine it's going to bid well for the relationship between the two bodies in the future for a while.
This is a $4.3 billion expansion project. Hundreds of millions of dollars had been earmarked for this. I think they'd already spent $60 million on just the planning of this and then the replanning of this based on reaction. This is kind of like, Erik, it seems to me like the bride getting cold feet at the altar when everybody is already pouring champagne at the reception.
Yeah, and
is that a good analogy?
By the way, the wedding planning has now stretched out 20 years. So you could see why the gnashing of teeth. How many iterations of invitations can you go through before you lose your mind? And to Ryan's point, I think one of the things that's going to be really interesting is you have to believe there's going to be some last-ditch effort to try and save this. But what can they really do? Short of flipping someone, one of the six on council, and getting a new vote, and then going back to CRTPO, this thing doesn't have a chance. And I think the best point, or maybe the most important point here, is the relationship with Raleigh. Yet again, when you look at NCDOT and state lawmakers and the history already, this is going to have some repercussions.
At the CRPTO meeting where this was nixed, Charlotte representative on that board, Ed Driggs, was absent and replaced by fellow councilman James Mitchell. Both of those men favored the toll lanes but voted no because of the city council's vote last week. Mecklenburg County Representative Lee Altman also was not at the meeting, replaced by board chair Mark Jarrell, who said he would follow majority sentiment, adding, quote, "The Board of Commissioners unequivocally will reject any notion that prioritizes people coming through this community on I-77 over the people that are in this community." But he also said this is more than just about concrete and traffic patterns. It's about leadership and what type of community we want to be. Is that ignoring the reality of the need to do something on I-77 between now and the next 50 years?
It's interesting to hear the victorious side. Most of them are saying, we won, that's great, this was a terrible plan. And then at the end they will say, but we know that we need to do something. But no one has any ideas yet. I guess perhaps Councilwoman Watlington would be the closest with her push for outside studies by UNC Charlotte. But other than that, we really haven't heard much other than we need to do something else. And that will be interesting as you get into a mayoral election. Once you get past the glow of the victory, how frustrated are people with the obvious, Mike, that people are stuck on the interstate waiting and waiting and waiting? Steve.
Yeah, I to Erik's point, there isn't a plan at the moment, and someone's going to have to come up with a plan. But, they really made this. Well, first of all, the whole toll lane concept, kind of people blame the NCDOT, but it's important to note that the city of Charlotte put this in motion in 2007. So the DOT is following Charlotte's orders, okay, to be fair. But the whole tolling, it's so complicated. It's a difficult engineering project to do toll lanes. They can strip this down. You can add one lane that's free. It's not that hard. It's far less expensive. I mean, there is a way out. The problem is they've been stuck on this toll lane plan, which is so complicated and so expensive that it's kind of locked them into this public-private partnership. And if they just go back, go back to basics, you can do this.
But I have about 20 seconds, Steve. The state has said there'll be no future highway construction unless it's a toll lane. So how can they put one lane down the middle of it?
Oh no, they're doing it in Gaston County. Next door. They're doing it all over the state.
When we come back, Jail North may be reopening. We'll talk about that and more. It's Charlotte Talks.
On the next Charlotte Talks, the preservation of our times for posterity. In North Carolina, much of that starts with the state archives, where millions of records quietly decide what can be proven, questioned, or forgotten about our past. It's like a time capsule that as we prepare to celebrate America's 250th birthday, We have a conversation with the state archivist about storing our past and preserving today, Monday at 9 on 90.7 WFAE.
I'm Peter O'Dowd. A tribe that lives along the banks of the Colorado River has granted legal personhood to the troubled waterway.
It's our namesake. It has a right to be protected under our law.
The leader of the Colorado River Indian tribes responds to drought on their sacred river. Next time, here and now.
That's today at noon on WFAE.
From Louis Armstrong and Miles Davis to Nina Freelon and Samara Joy, WFAE's Charlotte Jazz Channel is your window into the world of jazz, 24/7. From the iconic jazz legends to emerging talents, there's always something new and exciting to discover. If you've got an HD radio, switch over to WFAE HD2 to listen, or connect easily through our mobile app or directly at WFAE.org.
It's Charlotte Talks on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. It's the local news roundup. So Steve Harrison's with us. He's WFAE News Politics reporter. Ryan Pitkin is here, co-founder and editor of Queen City Nerve. Erik Spanberg is managing editor of the Charlotte Business Journal, and Mary Ramsey is the local government accountability reporter for the Charlotte Observer. Jail North was where Mecklenburg County used to house juvenile inmates, but Sheriff Gary McFadden closed that a few years ago because of staffing problems, and now he wants to reopen it to deal with overcrowding at the main jail. Here's what he posted in a YouTube video last week about the growth of our jail population.
In 2018, we had a population of 1,561. During COVID, we had 1,400, 1,300. But we've never had the numbers of 2000 or 2013. And I'm very concerned about that.
This overcrowding is forcing about 300 people to sleep in overflow areas at the main jail every night, and McFadden calls this overcrowding unprecedented. So, Mary, why is the jail population growing?
Yes, so Sheriff McFadden has attributed much of the overcrowding to Arena's Law, which is the state legislation that passed named for the young woman who was fatally stabbed on Charlotte's light rail last year. The bill included a number of provisions, including changing some pretrial release rules, which the sheriff said has led to more people staying in the jail.
Local children's advocates have been calling for the sheriff to reopen Jail North again as a juvenile jail, because now those youthful offenders are taken out of the county, and that's a hardship on relatives who want to visit them and even their attorneys, etc. That request did not move the needle. Why? Was it because he knew he needed more space to deal with this overcrowding problem?
So McFadden has not yet addressed that directly. There had sort of been a ramp up in the last year or so in conversations about reopening the facility as a juvenile detention center. McFadden convened some panels, but back in February, County Manager Mike Bryant told state officials in an email that he didn't expect the sheriff to ask for money to reopen Jail North as a juvenile detention center in the fiscal year 2027 budget cycle, which sort of indicated this was going to be a longer term thing. And then all of a sudden this week you have McFadden coming out and saying, instead of reopening the facility as a juvenile detention facility, it's needed to address overcrowding among adults at the Uptown jail.
And he shut the Jail North down because of staffing problems. I think there wasn't enough money to properly staff it. I don't know whether that's changed, but he says certainly times have changed.
There's a crisis. There's an emergency. We're going to sacrifice. We're sacrificing our staff now. We're going to sacrifice my staff to aggressively hire people.
So where is the money coming from for this? He wants to reopen the facility in August. He wants to hire up to 50 detention officers with starting salaries of about $68,000 plus signing bonuses and higher pay for those who work the night shift. As I understand it, it wasn't in the budget that Mecklenburg County was just presented by County Manager Mike Bryant and which they just approved. Why not?
I asked County Manager Mike Bryan about that this week, and he told me that it wasn't included in his budget because he didn't know it was happening until after the budget was essentially locked to be presented to county commissioners. The final vote by the county commission is not scheduled until June 2nd, so there is a little bit of a window there. Mike Bryan told me he is and his team are working with the sheriff and his team to see if they can get anything in last minute, but that's unlikely given it's going to take some time for the sheriff's office to figure out exactly how much all of this is going to cost. In the medium to long term, Mike Bryant told me that there are ways post-budget season the county could potentially find some money. They could dip into their fund balance, which is essentially the county savings account. They could also work with the sheriff's department to rejigger their existing budget, move some money that was allocated for other things previously around if needed, but still pretty up in the air exactly how much this is going to cost and where exactly that money is going to come from.
Meanwhile, the budget that County Manager Mike Bryan submitted to Mecklenburg County Commissioners provides for no cut in services and no property tax increase, despite increased requests for services, diminished revenues, and uncertainty at both the state and federal level. When he was on this program this week, I called him a magician, but Commissioner Arthur Griffin described it differently.
I'm sitting in the auditorium with my granddaughter, and I said, "This guy made an elephant dance."
Can't hear you.
I said, "This guy made an elephant dance."
Well, that's kind of magic. Commissioner Elaine Powell asked whether future budgets would include significant cost of living raises to keep pace with inflation. This year, the lowest paid workers in the county went from being paid $20 to $25 an hour. And as for the future, Bryant wasn't willing to commit, but he hopes it can be achieved.
It is indeed my interest to be the standard and make sure that we continue to pay a living wage to all our employees. I just don't know what the future is going to entail. So I don't want to be on record of saying each year when the cost of living go up and the living wages go up that the county is going to move along with that.
So, Mary, I thought the budget had passed. I thought they had said yes to this. They didn't say yes to this. There's still a final vote coming because they seem
Yes,
very pleased with it.
there are some more procedural hoops to jump through. The county will meet again next Thursday for what they call their straw vote, which is essentially when commissioners can try and if there's any additional expenses they want to try and get in there, they can pitch that to their colleagues, and then they'll take sort of an unofficial vote on whether to tell Mike Bryant to put that in. And then the official formal vote to accept the budget is currently scheduled for June 2nd, ahead of the start of the new fiscal year on July 1st.
Earlier this week, we did a program about the death last December of a 6-year-old child, Dominique Moody. It was precipitated by a deep dive set of investigations into her death by both WBTV and WSOC-TV, which turned up some serious failings and raised as many questions as it answered. And now the state of North Carolina's Department of Health and Human Services has ordered Mecklenburg County to address multiple Department of Social Services issues. You reported on this, Mary. Tell us more.
Yes, so the county received a letter from the state this week. The letter does not specifically name Dominique Moody, but it's pretty clear based on the information that that's how this all started. The child died back in December. The letter references a child fatality in December. And per procedure, the State Department of Health and Human Services reviewed the case file and found some violations of law and policy, which then led them to review a sample of about 100 unrelated cases, which uncovered additional issues. And so the county has been placed on a corrective action plan. That means they're required in the next 30 days to present the state with their plan for how they're going to address these failings. And then once the state signs off on that, the county will have to keep reporting back on their progress once a month until the state signs off and said that all of the issues have been addressed. If the county fails to follow through on that, the state could potentially take further action against the county and including taking over some sort of oversight of the Department of Social Services here in Mecklenburg.
For people who don't know this story, have not been following this story, this 6-year-old child, Dominique Moody, was seriously underweight when she died. She weighed only 27 pounds, and the average 6-year-old weighs about 45 to 47 pounds. Her body showed, according to the funeral director, that she had suffered numerous physical traumatic events over her life. Child Protective Services, police, and social workers had been called to the home dozens of times prior to her death, but closed investigations due to what they called insufficient evidence. Local media painted a very clear picture of what was happening in that home. North Carolina authorities have now found systemic issues in Mecklenburg County's Social Services Department, what they called a systemic lack of appropriate safety planning to address identified danger indicators and risk factors. And of course, as you said, they've been told to take corrective action. Earlier, I think it was this week or last week, a North Carolina House Oversight Committee also wanted to investigate this. They requested records from CMPD and the Department of Social Services, but a judge blocked those records from being released. Why? And if they can't get records, how did the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services know enough about this to call for corrective action?
Yes, so the fight for records in this case is something that oversight committee has been on, as well as many media organizations here in Charlotte. And the pushback from the county has consistently been that the district attorney's office says letting too many records be public could jeopardize the case against the 3 women who have been charged in this child's death. And that they are not required under state law to release those records. The Charlotte Observer and other media organizations, as well as now the House Oversight Committee, have been pushing back on that, trying to get those records. Some have become public. As you mentioned, WBTV's done some great reporting on this. My colleague Ryan Orley at the Observer has obtained some records as well, but we're still really waiting to get the full picture here. And as for the State Department of Health and Human Services, they have what's called a child fatality review team, which steps in these situations to review the individual cases. And given what that team found in the Moody file, they then pulled a sample of additional unrelated cases handled by the Mecklenburg Department of Social Services.
Okay. Concerns about data centers are springing up everywhere. They become the focus of discussions at Charlotte City Council recently, and now Mecklenburg County Commission is also undertaking this investigation or this conversations exploring these data centers. They're weighing whether or not to take a position on them. Some commissioners are wary, others want more information. Ryan, does this center on the same concerns that we've heard from City Council and from members of the community about these data centers?
Right, yeah, it does center on those concerns. It's a little bit of a different approach because obviously Charlotte City Council is the one who green lights sort of the rezoning ordinances that can lead to the construction of these facilities. But there have been calls for Mecklenburg County to look into these, produce reports, and really get a grasp on what the environmental impacts are, what the impacts are on nearby residents, whether through noise, air pollution, water pollution, what have you. It's really just a thing where community advocates are asking that elected officials at least be aware of what's going on. There was some talk on during Tuesday night's meeting from George Dunlap, for example, saying, I just don't know enough about this. And I think it's getting to a point here where if you're in a local elected official anywhere in the country, you should be reading up about this. It's getting to a point where it's not really everyone has their turn week by week saying, I don't know enough about this. We got to look into it. And people have got to start doing their research and knowing what the impacts on their communities are.
As you said, cities and towns have more control over the location of these data centers than do counties, just the way the things are laid out in our world. But these data centers are facts of life. We need them. They've got to happen if you want to keep competitive with big data and artificial intelligence. And people have misgivings, including Commissioner Susan Rodriguez McDowell.
It's kind of like a necessary evil in that it's unsustainable. It's like the geniuses created these amazing things that we cannot sustain. And we're running out of room, running out of water, running out of all this stuff.
And Commissioner Elaine Powell pointed out what so many others have commented on, the environmental impact of large-scale data centers on the land, on electricity, and the tremendous amount of water these centers consume.
I know there might be some positive, but it's like hard to find. And so I'll just start with drought.
Commissioner George Dunlap wants more information. Chair Mark Jarrell says the board needs to be forward-thinking and get out ahead of this evolving technology. if the county has so little control over these things, why are they even talking about it?
Yeah, so this was something that in many ways was sparked by Commissioner Durrell. His district includes the proposed data center near Reedy Creek. That's something that the city has been weighing that's become controversial. And, the message from staff essentially, like you said, Mike, and like Ryan touched on, is that because the county has virtually no rezoning authority, they only have that over a very small sliver of unincorporated land down in the southern part of the county. There's not a lot they can directly do, but that there are more unofficial, for lack of a better word, ways the county could influence this if they take a position essentially lobbying the city and towns to make rezoning decisions that line up with that position, being able to present a unified front with the city and the towns to the state legislature as the state legislature considers what they do or don't want to do to regulate these data centers. So the idea is sort of that this having a unified position for the county would give the county a little bit more muscle to flex on this issue in the long term.
Go ahead, Eric. Did you want to talk?
I just want to say very quickly, going back to Ryan's point, I think there's also now a sense of obligation. There's an expectation among voters that, hey, you've got to do something. These things are sprouting up everywhere, and it's affecting the environment and noise pollution. Why aren't you addressing this? So I think they feel compelled in that regard too.
Yeah, there are concerns about the tremendous amount of electricity these things consume, and that has traditionally given electric bills for normal consumers to go higher. They use a tremendous amount of water to cool the servers inside these vast buildings. I don't know why they can't be closed loop systems, but some are, some aren't. There are concerns about diesel pollution because they have to be up and running 24/7, and if the power goes out from the grid, the diesels fire up, and there's noise pollution evidently because these things hum. And they don't employ a lot of people. So that's when when local officials say, I don't see what the benefit is because it's not increasing the tax base very much. That's why that's happening. So why don't they have enough information? The epicenter of these data centers is just to the north of us in Virginia. They have, I think, more data centers than anywhere in the country. Can't we just go up there and see what the problems are?
Yes. And also, Mike, I want to go back to what you were saying just a second ago about closed loop water systems. This is a lot of the fight right here is, as with most businesses and industries, the data center developers would prefer not to have extra costs like installing a closed water system. So those are some of the fights that you're going to see, I think, more on the city side because they control the zoning and the ordinances. But this is very much like so many of these political business issues, a matter of who's going to pay the freight, who's going to pay the cost. Are they going to hold the businesses accountable to institute the safety and environmental safeguards that are wanted?
But is that the job of the county or the state?
I think it's more on the state and the city government, but as Mary says, there is the idea of a unified front of having some influence, and so I think that's why the county is looking at this.
Let's get the CRTPO to weigh in. Get them to vote.
Always simplifies the process.
I was just going to say that this new world in which we live, where we're rejecting new highways on the eve of their construction, perhaps that should give pause to people who want to put data centers in our area.
Can we get Mayor John Higdon to weigh in on this, on the data centers?
It has been a very widespread, to that point, Mike. There have been everyone from Durham to Apex to there's a bunch of towns and counties that have already instituted these moratoriums that Charlotte seems to be moving towards. So it's a very bipartisan sort of effort to rein in. There's multiple pieces of legislation that are also aiming at it at the state level too. So it's interesting to be watching.
So Mary, I have 20 seconds. Go ahead.
Yeah, just wanted to put a bow on things. One other area where the county could potentially find something to do is the environment and land acquisition. That's something the county is quite focused on. So as they sort of develop their strategies for that in the long term, could potentially be impacted by how all this data center stuff moves forward.
When we come back, we're heading up to Mooresville, where pants may in fact not be optional.
Coming up in 20 minutes, Kentucky Congressman Thomas Massie loses his GOP primary. A settlement in a lawsuit between President Trump and the IRS includes a clause that precludes the agency from investigating the president his family, and his businesses ever again. And a California judge tossed out Tesla CEO Elon Musk's lawsuit targeting OpenAI and its CEO Sam Altman. 1A covers those stories and more at 10.
There are many ways to support the programs you love on WFAE. Monthly gifts, vehicle donations, and now real estate donations. Maybe it's a cabin you never visit, a lot you're not using, or a house that's more work than it's worth. These kinds of gifts can do more than clear your plate. They can power the public radio you depend on. Your property donation may offer you tax advantages while helping fund the stories and voices you count on every day. Learn more about donating property at wfae.org/real estate. Experience local news on the go and on your schedule with WFAE's daily news podcast, Newsworthy. Every morning, Newsworthy is packed with the latest headlines and powerful feature reporting from the WFAE newsroom and our regional partners. We make the news engaging, informative, and easily accessible, perfect for your morning routine or an afternoon break. Subscribe to Newsworthy today, wherever you get your podcasts.
It's Charlotte Talks and the local news roundup on WFAE and WFAE.org. I'm Mike Collins. Steve Harrison joins us, our WFAE politics reporter. Mary Ramsey's local government accountability reporter with the Charlotte Observer. Ryan Pitkin, co-founder and editor of Queen City Nerve, and Erik Spanberg, managing editor of the Charlotte Business Journal. Erik, the saga of the Mooresville mayor caught wandering town hall late at night with no pants continues. Chris Carney, with all the stuff going on in the White House, why are we even talking about this? Who cares? But Chris Carney hinted this week that he might resign before his current term ends in November of 2027. So remind us, unfortunately, I have to have you do this, how this all started.
I think this started sometime before people were pondering toll lanes on I-77. No, this dates back to, I believe, October of 2024, when the mayor of Mooresville went into town hall in the middle of the night. He was accompanied by a woman who is not his wife, I think a friend, and that stirred up questions about why he was there. He said he had gotten ill, and then the questions began about the video from the security system and whether the video could be shared publicly. WBTV has been involved in a lawsuit to get that video, and we have had, as you just mentioned, Mike, numerous updates since then about what exactly was he doing, why was he doing it, and will we ever see the video?
This has been all over the news for months now, and at first he said he would not consider resigning even after the town board held a 4-2 no confidence vote. In fact, at one point he said this to WSOC-TV.
I've never thought, to be fair, vomiting and making a mess would become a national story.
Well, it did, and it has become an even bigger piece of news, a bigger mess. At this week's town board meeting, he told fellow members he might consider his future after the budget passes.
And then the conversation will then be, how do my wife and I go back to the wonderful life that we've had? And we have given plenty of this community over our years that we weren't elected. And I'm happy to go back to doing much for this community as I can as a citizen, because again, I think too many people get caught up in the highlight of thinking a title matters.
So has this become a problem for the town of Mooresville, or is this simply a political football?
I think it's mostly a political football, and then, it's one of those topics, who can resist this kind of story? It was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, for God's sakes. It's just one of those things that's so bizarre and odd. It is interesting to hear that turnabout in opinion from him, but I suspect that if he does resign and they appoint an interim mayor, that they will be able to carry out the town's business just fine in the future.
And he may be forced into resigning. Mooresville Commissioner Dana Tucker says if he doesn't remove himself, his colleagues might hold a special hearing for members of the public to tell the mayor what they think.
We can say, what do you really feel? And is there this welling of support, or is there not? That's one option. I don't know, as we say what's best for the town, that's best for the town.
Stay tuned. The General Assembly is inching closer to putting 2 constitutional amendments on taxes before voters in November. So let's start with the amendment that would cap local property tax increases. It passed the House with the 3/5 majority required to pass a constitutional amendment, thanks in part to the support of 2 former Democrats turned unaffiliated, Carla Cunningham and Nassif Majid. And then the Senate passed the bill with 1 Democrat, Dan Blue, crossing the aisle. Constitutional amendments are not subject to the governor's signature or veto. But this does have significant opposition from some county managers, including Mike Bryant with Mecklenburg County, who's worried about his being able to meet the county's needs if their primary source of revenue is capped. Steve, why do lawmakers want to do this?
There is a sense in Raleigh among Republicans that, well, I think, let me start over. All of us who live in homes, who own our own homes, have seen our home values increase significantly in the state as so many people move in. And therefore, our property taxes have often gone up. People see that, they feel that. There is a sense in Raleigh that local governments have been collecting more property tax revenue than really they need on the basis of inflation and population growth. Now, here locally in Mecklenburg County, we haven't been singled out. The city of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County haven't been singled out as one of those so-called offenders, but other places have. And so this is something you see Republicans doing in other states as well. In Florida, Governor DeSantis is talking about trying to get rid of the property tax entirely. So I think that, you know, when this is put on the ballot in November, along with the other amendment that would permanently lower the income tax rate, I mean, it stands a really good chance of passing. Because who doesn't want to lower their taxes?
Exactly. The wording of this amendment, however, merely says, quote, the General Assembly shall enact general laws limiting the amount by which the levy of taxes on property may increase, which may include exceptions. So does that mean, that's pretty generic. Does that mean that the cap would be open to the discretion of future General Assemblies and that the cap could be movable over time?
Yeah, I think so. There's no detail, like you said, about how much money local governments, how much they could raise taxes, what that limit would look like. We don't know. And I think here in locally, it hasn't been a big problem yet because of Mecklenburg County's explosive growth. It's usually easier to balance a budget in a county that's growing than a county that's stagnant or losing population. But Mike, it's not just Democratic governments that are raising questions about this. I think the Union County Board of Commissioners has come out against this. That's a very Republican county. So there's some bipartisan concern among local governments about how much this would handcuff them.
And Democratic House Minority Leader Robert Reeves has called this bill as a bill that does nothing. Longtime Mecklenburg County Democrat Becky Carney says this amendment would stifle growth and added we're heading to a real bad train wreck. Did she elaborate on that?
I am not sure if I did not see that quote, so I'm not sure if she elaborated on the type of train wreck or exactly what it would look like.
Meanwhile, the state's already on a schedule to reduce personal income taxes, but a bill that would allow a constitutional amendment requiring the personal income tax rate to be capped at 3.5% has passed the Senate and is being fast-tracked in the House. In the legislature, this is viewed largely along party lines, with Republicans in favor. WUNC's Colin Campbell spoke with one of those Republicans, Senator Ralph Heiss, who says the state would look beyond, or should look beyond, income taxes for sources of revenue.
If we continue to remain so dependent on the income tax, our deficits are worse when the economy turns down than they are from our other tax revenues.
I mean, don't all tax revenues go down in a recession, Erik?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry. I'm trying to be neutral here, but that's quite a quote right there. That's quite a comment. And also, just the idea of where does government get money? Yes, it comes from taxes. I think we all understand that. It's interesting to look at income tax rates, which are already scheduled to go down, I think, to 2.99% by 2033, at the same time that the state continues to phase out entirely its corporate taxes. So where does the money come from at some point? And I think that's the fight. Now, part of this is the typical Republican Democrat, how do you spend it? But you got to have something to spend.
And county managers have said on this program and others for a long time, taxes equal services. You don't want anything from the government, you won't get anything because there won't be any money to service the services. Meanwhile, Tamika Walker-Kelly with the North Carolina Association of Educators, who is already concerned about what she sees as declining support for public education in our state, told Colin Campbell that she believes this tax cap would further hurt school funding.
Now you want to write tax cuts that will mostly benefit the wealthy into our state's constitution. That is not fiscal responsibility. That is a permanent transfer of wealth away from our children.
So should this hit the ballot in November, voters probably are likely to say yes, because who wants to pay more taxes, right? Is this likely to pass through the General Assembly?
Yeah, I mean, exactly what Steve said on the previous issue. People are going to be very unlikely to say they want higher taxes. Mike, can I add context just very quickly? In 2013, which is essentially the start of the Republican takeover of the legislature, the highest personal income tax rate in the state was 7.775%. It's 3.99% now, and as I said, it's scheduled to go to 2.99% in 7 years. So that's, even in a growing state, that's quite a hit to your revenue.
And what, if anything, has suffered as a result?
Well, I think there would be plenty of people who would say that healthcare has suffered, that roads have suffered, that the quality and accessibility of education has suffered. So there are plenty of things that are up for debate in that conversation.
Okay. North Carolina Attorney General Jeff Jackson has been very busy filing lawsuits since he came into power, along with other states' attorneys general, and often winning these cases. Now he's suing the Federal Department of Education over new restrictions on student loans, which he says could make it harder to recruit nurses and other healthcare workers.
This is going to have a dramatic effect on the ability to afford an education in North Carolina in these medical fields.
What would these restrictions do, Erik?
So the restrictions would take away the designation of professional degree for nurses, physician's assistants, and physical therapists. And in doing so, the amount of loans would be cut in half. And that creates financial hardships, which is what the Attorney General is talking about. The other thing that you're hearing him say, and others in other states that are bringing similar suits, is that there's already a shortage of healthcare workers. When you further limit the pool by implementing these tighter financial rules, then you're only worsening the problem.
That's what Jeff Jackson says, and Deborah Barksdale, who is the president of the American Academy of Nursing, agrees.
If this rule discourages even a fraction of students from pursuing graduate nursing education, and the evidence strongly suggests it will, rural and underserved populations across the country will feel that loss first and feel it hardest.
The nursing shortage is no secret. We've been talking about it for years. So why would the federal government be taking this step?
I think this was part of the big, beautiful bill, and part of it was to try and reduce debt, I think. And so here we are.
Okay. Well, that's another maneuver by the Trump administration. And since Senator Thom Tillis has decided not to run for re-election, he has appeared more willing to comment and to take issue with various maneuvers by that administration. His latest comment is focused on a nearly $1.8 billion fund created by Donald Trump's Department of Justice at his direction to compensate people who they believe were investigated for political reasons. Does that include James Comey, I wonder? Including those who were convicted in court by juries and later pardoned by Donald Trump. Thom Tillis doesn't think much of this idea, and that is putting it mildly.
I'm not going to be an attorney and judge its legality, but I think it's stupid on stilts.
Why?
Because it will invariably put us in a position where your taxpayer dollars and my taxpayer dollars could potentially compensate someone who assaulted a police officer, admitted their guilt, got convicted, got pardoned, and now we're going to pay them for that? That's absurd. The American people are going to reject this out of hand.
He's also called this a pot of money for punks. That was a conversation with Spectrum News's.
He's big on alliteration.
Jones. Yeah, he's very into that now. Has there been any public reaction to this yet? Do we
to
know?
his comments or to the
to the idea of giving $1.8 billion to people who attacked
there
the
has
Capitol?
there has been a lot of backlash, and by the way, his newly appointed, I guess, Robin to his Batman in the "You Only Live Once, I'm Leaving Office" club, Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana is also beginning to push back on Trump. So there definitely are some defections, and particularly with this one because of the egregious nature of it.
And this is being pushed by Todd Blanche, who's the interim attorney general. He appeared before Congress and would not rule out giving some money from this slush fund to people who assaulted police officers on January the 6th. Tillis said that he wouldn't get into hypotheticals, but if Trump nominates Blanche to be the permanent attorney general, he said that, quote, anybody who equivocates and supports the thugs that harm police officers will never get my vote in committee or on the floor. And he added they better not have anything in their records suggesting that what happened on January 6th was anything but one of the darkest days in American history. Mary, you hail from South Carolina, where Ralph Norman has said that what happened on January 6th didn't happen. It was conducted by people who don't like the president to make him look bad.
Yes. Is there a question?
There's no question. There can be no question. It's just a comment. Congress has the power of the purse. The executive branch isn't just able to, one would think, able to cobble together almost $2 billion and hand it out in any way they please. Is this legal? Is this liable to come up with successful challenges?
There has been some legal action already. 2 officers who were at the Capitol on January 6th have filed a suit. Wouldn't be surprised if more cases were to spring up. Obviously, a lot of that depends on what court it ends up in. Can they get a friendly judge for their side? So we're still in the early stages of the legal chatter over all this, but already at least one case.
And we don't have time to get into the legal maneuvers going on in South Carolina over redistricting. I wish we did, but we're out of time. And we do have enough time to say that the Hurricanes, who are in the race for the Stanley Cup, Erik, lost last night, but they're not out of it because this is like a best of 9,000 series, right?
That's right. The best of 9,000 series continues tomorrow night in Raleigh. We'll see if they can rebound.
It's actually a best of 7 series, to be fair about this. And this will not be their first trip to the Stanley Cup playoff, correct?
Correct. They are perennial attendees of said event.
So they're a winning team. That explains why they're not here. Erik Spanberg, managing editor of the Business Journal, Ryan Pitkin, Queen City Nerve, Mary Ramsey with the Observer, Steve Harrison with WFAE News. Thank you all for the hour.
Charlotte Talks is a production of 90.7 WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from Mazda of South Charlotte. Our executive producer is Gabe Altieri. The senior producer is